She is standing under bright lights in the Millennium Dome in London, 18 years old, and she has just given the wrong answer. The question was simple. Which living woman do you admire most? And in the nerves of that moment, she said Mother Teresa, a woman who had passed away 3 years earlier. A factual mistake, live, in front of the entire world. That single slip should have cost her everything. Pageants are decided on composure, on precision, on saying the right thing at the right second. And she got it wrong. And then they called her name anyway. Miss World, 2000. Most people stop the story right there. Roll credits. Crown on her head, confetti falling. A girl from Berkeley, about to become one of the most recognized faces on the planet. But that's not where her story actually starts to mean something. That's just where the noise starts. The real story, the one worth telling, is what happened in the years right after that crown, when nobody was watching anymore, when the cameras had moved on to the next Miss World, and she was just a teenager, trying to figure out who she was supposed to be now. Because here's what people don't talk about. Winning Miss World didn't hand her a career. It handed her a spotlight, and spotlights are unforgiving. They show everything. Every flaw, every mistake, every moment you're not ready yet. And she was about to walk straight into one of the most brutal industries on earth, with almost no formal training, no filmmaking pedigree, nothing but a crown and a lot of nerve. She signed her first film in 2002. She was still practically a teenager. And before that film could even properly launch her, something happened that almost ended everything before it began. She had been struggling to breathe, assuming it was a bad sinus infection. Something so minor she barely thought about it. A doctor found a polyp in her nasal cavity. Routine surgery, they told her. Go in, remove it, go home. It was not routine. While shaving the polyp away, the doctor accidentally damaged the bridge of her nose. It collapsed. When they removed the bandages, she didn't recognize her own face. Her mother stood there in shock. This wasn't a scratch. This was the literal structure of her identity, in an industry built entirely on image, gone overnight. Think about the cruelty of that timing. A teenage girl, brand new to an industry that worships faces, and the one thing she was told mattered most was suddenly unrecognizable. She lost film projects because of it. Directors quietly moved on. People who had been excited to work with her stopped calling. She has since described that period as feeling devastated, hopeless, like the girl who won Miss World had simply vanished, and nobody knew if she was coming back. Sit with that for a second. Not the glamorous version of struggle we like to imagine, where someone works hard and gets discovered. This was a body that betrayed her, an industry that judged her on it instantly, and a teenager left to rebuild both her face and her belief that she still belonged in the room. She had two choices in that moment. Disappear quietly. Let the industry write her off as a beauty queen who peaked at 18, or fight her way back into rooms that had already decided she wasn't worth the risks anymore. She chose to fight. She had reconstructive surgery. She kept showing up, and slowly, film by film, she started rebuilding not just her face, but her reputation, proving she wasn't just a crown, she was an actress. It took years of smaller films, of being underestimated, of critics writing her off as another pretty face from a pageant, before something shifted. In 2008, she took on a role in a film called Fashion, playing a model whose rise and fall mirrored, in some uncomfortable ways, the exact industry pressures she'd lived through. That role won her the National Film Award for Best Actress. The industry that had quietly closed doors on a teenager with a collapsed nose was now handing her its highest honor for acting. And here's the principle buried inside that first chapter of her story, the one thing you can actually take with you. The moment life damages the thing you thought was your only asset is usually the moment you're forced to discover you had something sturdier underneath it the whole time. She thought her value was in a crown and a face. What she actually had was the will to keep walking back into rooms that had rejected her. That's not glamorous. That's not cinematic. But that is exactly what separates the people who make it from the people who quietly fade after the first real setback. Now, fast forward. She's not a teenager anymore. She is one of the biggest stars in Indian cinema, doing 40-50 films, critical acclaim, commercial success, awards lining up. By almost any measure, she has already won. She could have stayed exactly there for the rest of her career, comfortable, celebrated, safe. And this is where most people would have stopped pushing. Why risk what took over a decade to build? But she has talked openly about a feeling that crept in during those peak years, a sense of being limited, not unsuccessful. Limited. Like she'd mapped the ceiling of a room she used to think was endless. She said the decision to walk away from the industry that made her wasn't born out of frustration or bitterness. It came from something quieter and harder to explain. A refusal to settle, a competitiveness with herself, more than with anyone else. So she did something that made almost no sense on paper. At the height of her Bollywood career, she got on a plane to the United States to audition like a complete unknown for American television. Think about what that actually meant. No guaranteed audience, no built-in fame. In America, she wasn't a superstar. She was just another actress in a waiting room, competing against people who'd been working that system their entire lives. She was trading a kingdom for a chance to be a stranger again. The odds were not just against her. They were structurally against an entire category she represented. Lead roles on major American network television for a South Asian woman simply did not exist at that level. Not because the talent wasn't there, because the door had never really been built. Then came Quantico in 2015. She was cast as the lead, an FBI recruit at the center of a terrorism conspiracy thriller on ABC. And when it premiered, she became the first South Asian actor to headline an American broadcast network drama. Read that again. Not a supporting role. Not a side character written in for diversity credit. The lead. The name the whole show was built around. Picture the pressure sitting on her shoulders in that moment. It wasn't just her career on the line anymore. Every executive who had ever hesitated to cast someone who looked like her in a lead role was now watching the ratings, watching the reviews, deciding whether this was a fluke or proof of something bigger. She wasn't just acting. She was quietly making an argument with every episode that the doubt had been wrong all along. And this is the turning point worth remembering. She didn't wait for Hollywood to decide she was ready. She decided first and then made herself impossible to ignore. That's the principle from this chapter, and it's the one people get backwards constantly. We wait for permission. We wait to be picked. She proved that sometimes you have to walk into the room before anyone has agreed to let you stay and let your work force the agreement afterward. But success in a new industry doesn't erase the ugliness that came before it. Because underneath both chapters of her career, the Bollywood years and the Hollywood years, there's a thread most audience never saw. Early on, working on a film where her character was undercover and seductive, a director once told her stylist, in front of her, that he needed to see her underwear on camera. Otherwise, in his words, why would anyone come to watch the film? He didn't even say it to her directly. He said it about her, like she wasn't in the room. She has described that moment plainly as dehumanizing. That's the part of the story that never makes the highlight reel. Not the crown, not the record-breaking lead role, not the magazine covers. The quiet, ordinary cruelty of being spoken about instead of spoken to. Of having your body treated as a bargaining chip in someone else's creative decision. And she wasn't the only one who experienced moments like that. She was simply one of the people willing to eventually say it out loud. Even earlier than that, before any of the fame, there's a smaller but equally telling moment. At 13, she moved to the United States to study, and she was teased for her skin color. Classmates called her Brownie. A teenager dropped into an unfamiliar country, made to feel like her own skin was something to apologize for. Long before The Crown, before the film industry, before Quantico, she already knew what it felt like to walk into a room and be underestimated for reasons that had nothing to do with her abilities. So when you connect those dots, the teased teenager, the actress spoken about instead of to, the woman told a South Asian lead, couldn't carry an American network drama. You start to see the actual shape of her journey. It was never really about one crown, or one collapsed nose, or one show. It was decades of walking into rooms that hadn't been built for her, and choosing, over and over, not to shrink to fit their expectations. That word, choosing, is the whole point. Because talent gets you noticed once. Circumstance gets you an opportunity once. But nobody's career survives on a single lucky break. What survives is the daily, unglamorous decision to keep showing up as yourself, especially in the moments when it would be so much easier to disappear, to blend in, to accept the smaller version of the story other people are comfortable with. There's one more piece of this puzzle worth sitting with, because it's the part that ties her entire journey together. She has spent years being reduced, at different points, to a single label: the beauty queen, the Bollywood star, the Hollywood newcomer, the actress married to a musician. Every industry, every headline, every stage of her career tried to hand her a box to live inside. And every single time, instead of arguing with the box, she just kept building past it. New films, new countries, new languages of storytelling. A production company, a seat at global platforms like the World Economic Forum and UNICEF, where she's used her visibility to speak about girls' education and equality, the very things that were denied to her own sense of belonging as a teenager, called Brownie in a Massachusetts classroom. None of that happened because one moment fixed everything. It happened because she kept choosing, again and again, on ordinary days. Nobody was filming. To not quit on herself. And that's really what this whole journey is trying to tell you. If you actually listen to it, instead of just admiring it from a distance. It's not a story about a woman who got lucky. It's a story about a woman who got knocked down by a botched surgery at 18, dismissed by an industry that only wanted her face, spoken about instead of spoken to by men who should have respected her, and told, implicitly, by an entire system, that someone who looked like her didn't get to lead. And every time, she picked herself back up without waiting for someone else's approval to do it. That is the real definition of choosing yourself. It's not a slogan you put on a wall. It's not something you do once and then coast on forever. It's the decision you make on the days no one is clapping. It's rebuilding your face and your confidence after a surgery goes wrong and doors start quietly closing. It's getting on a plane toward an industry that has never once made room for someone who looks like you and auditioning anyway. It's sitting in a room where someone talks about your body like you're not in it, and deciding that moment doesn't get to define what you're capable of. Here's what her path actually proves, and it has nothing to do with fame or crowns or box office numbers. It proves that the setbacks that feel like they're erasing you, the surgery, the rejection, the label, the room full of people who doubt you belong there. Those are not the end of your story. They're the part of the story that tests whether you're going to keep choosing yourself when it's hard or only when it's easy. Most people choose themselves when things are going well, when they're winning, when the applause is loud. The real test, the one that actually shapes a life, is whether you keep choosing yourself in the quiet, unglamorous middle, when your face is unrecognizable in the mirror, when the calls stop coming, when you're the only person in the room who looks like you, and everyone is waiting to see if you'll shrink. You don't need a crown to understand that. You don't need millions of people watching. You just need to recognize that somewhere in your own life, right now, there's a version of that same choice sitting in front of you. A door that hasn't been built for you yet. A version of yourself people have already decided isn't ready. A setback that feels like it erased everything you worked for. The story isn't asking you to admire her. It's asking you to look at your own life and ask, where am I shrinking when I could be choosing myself instead? What room have I not walked into yet, simply because nobody invited me? What version of myself have I quietly agreed to make smaller because it felt safer than the risk of being underestimated in public? That's the golden chapter waiting for every single one of us. Not a perfect one, not one without setbacks. Just one where, on the hard days, we choose ourselves anyway. So here's what I want you to do before you close this video. Drop one word in the comments. Just one that represents the goal you're choosing yourself for right now. The thing you keep almost starting. The version of you that's waiting on the other side of a decision you haven't made yet. Write it down. Let it be seen. And if this story moved something in you, hit subscribe and become part of the Golden Grace family, because we're going to keep telling these stories. Real ones, honest ones, about people who chose themselves before anyone gave them permission to. Your golden chapter is still being written. Go choose yourself today.